Welcome back to Books and Bites, where we turn reading into action. We're tackling a classic today, a book that's, well, a little bit of a nightmare. We're diving into Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis.
Oh, yeah, The Metamorphosis. It's one of those books that really gets under your skin and just stays with you. You know, it was published back in 1915.
Wow, 1915. That's a long time ago.
Yeah. And it's considered like a foundation for both existentialist and absurdist literature. It's definitely unsettling, it's thought-provoking, and it will stick with you long after you finish it. I promise you that.
It's definitely one of those books everyone seems to have like a strong opinion about.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that a little. What makes The Metamorphosis so fascinating?
Well, I mean, it all begins with that first line,
Yeah.
you know? As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. Like, Kafka doesn't waste any time. He throws us right into this absurd situation.
I mean, it's pretty shocking and bizarre image. But there's also something oddly familiar about it. Like, I think we've all woken up and felt a little off. Maybe not quite insect-like, but not quite ourselves.
That's a great point, and I think that's part of why the story is so powerful. It really connects with that feeling of vulnerability, you know, and that feeling of alienation, the fear of being trapped, like in a situation that we can't control.
And it's so interesting how Gregor's initial reaction to becoming this insect isn't really even terror.
Right.
Like, his first thought is being late for work.
Exactly. He's not freaking out that he's a bug. He's worried about his job, which we quickly find out he hates.
Right.
Which I think really says something about the dehumanizing nature of work. You know how society kind of forces us to choose productivity over well-being?
Yeah, it's almost like even after he's transformed, he's still like bound by these societal expectations.
Yeah.
You know, it makes you wonder if like the transformation is actually a physical manifestation of him already feeling trapped.
Wow. That's a really interesting interpretation. I think Kafka is definitely playing with that idea. You know, the insect becomes a symbol of Gregor's alienation, you know, not only from the world around him, but from himself as well.
So how does the family react to his, his new look?
Right.
I mean, I'm imagining this wasn't the kind of family breakfast they were expecting.
Yeah, no, not at all. At first, there's like some confusion.
Yeah.
And they're worried, you know, knocking on his door. Did you oversleep?
Right.
Mom's calling out to him. Dad's getting impatient. The sister, Greet, she seems to be the most sympathetic at first. Really worried about him.
So like a glimmer of hope there.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll all come together, you know, and help him through this.
But remember, this is Kafka. Things are never that simple. They're concerned. I mean, it quickly shifts to horror when Gregor finally opens the door and they see him. His mom, she faints. His dad gets aggressive. And even Greet is overwhelmed by fear and disgust.
Wow. So it's really like his transformation becomes a mirror reflecting their own, like, anxieties and prejudices.
Exactly. What's fascinating is that their reaction to this whole metamorphosis shows how fragile family bonds can be, you know, and how shallow acceptance really is. He's no longer their son or their brother. He's this monster, this other that needs to be rejected.
Yeah. It really makes you think, like, what if this actually happened?
Right.
Would we be any different? Would we look past the, the physical
Right.
and recognize the person underneath?
It's a big question, and I think that's the real power of this story. It forces us to think about those things, like empathy and acceptance and what it really means to be human.
So Gregor's he's an insect now, isolated in his room. His family's trying to deal with it all. Yeah. What happens next? I mean, do they even try to understand it? To adjust?
Well, at first, his younger sister, Great, she steps up to care for him, bringing him food, cleaning his room, even trying to figure out what he likes to eat now. So there's this sense of compassion there, like she wants to connect with him, despite what's happened, Yeah,
it's almost like she still sees the Gregor she knew before.
Yeah.
Even though he's an insect.
Yeah. But even Greet's compassion has limits. As time goes on, weeks and then months, the burden of caring for him, it starts to weigh on her, she starts to resent it, all the sacrifices she's making. And that empathy she had, it starts to fade.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So what about the rest of the family? Do they try to help at all?
They don't. His father, he was kind of weak at first, dependent on Gregor's income, but he becomes really hardened, resentful. He sees Gregor as a burden, something shameful that needs to be hidden away.
Wow. That's such a change from the father we saw in the beginning. It's almost like Gregor transforming brought out the worst in him.
Yeah. I think it's more than that, though. Gregor's transformation exposed this underlying power dynamic within the family. Before, Gregor was the provider, held everything together financially. But now he can't work. And the father's forced to face his own, I guess, inadequacy. And his resentment toward his son, it grows.
And what about his mom? How does she deal with seeing her son like this?
She's really torn, between her motherly instincts and her fear. She wants to care for Gregor, but she's also terrified of him. Remember, she fainted when she first saw him. And she continues to be really overwhelmed by his presence throughout the story.
So basically the family is falling apart under the weight of everything that's happened.
Yeah. And Kafka does a brilliant job of showing how a crisis like this, it can expose the cracks in a normal family. It reveals how fragile these bonds are and the limits of love and compassion.
Yeah, not to mention the family is struggling financially now, too.
Right. Gregor can't work, so they're forced to take in lodgers, which further reduces Gregor. They want to keep him hidden away, a secret.
It's really tragic. Gregor's stuck in this nightmare, transformed, abandoned by his own family. It's awful.
And it gets worse. Great and the mother, they decide to remove all the furniture from his room, thinking it will give him more space to crawl around.
But wouldn't that make him feel even more like an animal? Like they're taking away the last things he recognizes from his human life?
Exactly. And to Gregor, it feels like a violation. He clings to a picture, just a reminder of his humanity. But it terrifies his mother. She faints again, and when his father comes home, he's furious. He attacks Gregor, throws apples at him.
Oh my God. So even their attempts to help, it backfires. It pushes him further away.
Yeah, and it's a really important moment in the story because one of the apples, it gets lodged in Gregor's back. And it causes this wound that never heals. It becomes the symbol of the damage his family's rejection has caused.
When we left off, Gregor's family was pushing him away, further and further, physically and emotionally. He was injured, alone, losing hope.
So where does the story go from there?
It just continues to spiral. The wound from the apple, it gets infected. His health gets worse, and his family, they just become more indifferent. They only see him as a burden now, in the way of their own happiness.
It's hard to believe how heartless they've become. I mean, this is someone who is so important to them. Does anything happen? That changes things. There's this one scene that's especially sad. Greet, she's playing violin for the lodgers, and Gregor, he's drawn to the music. He comes out of his room.
He's longing for connection, a reminder of the beauty he's lost.
Exactly. But instead of compassion, the lodgers freak out. They're terrified. They even threaten to leave. And so in this moment of crisis, we see the ultimate betrayal.
You're kidding me. Greet, she turns on him too. After all she did.
Yeah. She tells her parents, he must go. That is the only solution, Father. She says they can't live like this anymore, that Gregor isn't her brother, that they have to get rid of him.
Wow. That is just chilling. It's such a reversal from how she was before. What causes that shift in her?
I think it's a lot of things. The weight of taking care of him, the financial strain, the social stigma. But I think more than anything, Greet just can't reconcile the Gregor she knew with what he's become.
So she just erases the past to deal with it.
Right. It's a defense mechanism. Protects herself from the pain of his transformation.
So what happens to Gregor? How does he take this final rejection?
He goes back to his room, completely defeated, abandoned by his own family. He dies alone shortly after. And the cleaning lady, she finds him. She just tells the family. Like it's nothing.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
That is bleak. So how does the family react? Any remorse? Sadness?
Here's the thing. Instead of grieving, they're relieved. They take a day off work, they go to the countryside, and they start talking about the future. Like Rita getting married, Gregor is forgotten.
It's almost too much. They're celebrating his death, like they've been freed.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Kafka's trying to show us. Gregor, who gave his life to his family, he becomes disposable to them. His transformation strips him of everything. His humanity, his value, his very identity.
It's like a commentary on how society dehumanizes people.
Yeah.
Especially if they're different or they're not useful anymore.
Yeah, exactly. The Metamorphosis, it forces us to look at the dark side of human nature, our capacity for cruelty, indifference, self-preservation.
So after this dark tale, what are some key takeaways? What do you hope listeners will think about?
For me, it's about empathy and compassion. Seeing the human in everyone, even when it's hidden. It reminds us that our worth shouldn't be tied to what we produce or if we fit in.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it shows us how fragile family bonds can be. It's like a warning not to take our loved ones for granted and to cherish the time we have together.
A quote that sticks with me is when Gregor says, I cannot make you understand. I cannot make anyone understand what is happening inside me. I cannot even explain it to myself. It captures that feeling of isolation, trying to communicate what's going on inside.
My favorite quote is darker. It really shows how Gregor's family betrayed him. When Greg says he must go, it's just 3 words, but it's powerful. It shows their detachment, their willingness to sacrifice him.
Powerful quotes indeed. It's a challenging book, but it makes you think, about our own lives, relationships, our values.
If you want to really dive into this masterpiece, we encourage you to check out the full book. You can find a link in the episode description.
And don't forget to subscribe to Books and Bites for more deep dives into books that will impact your life. We help turn reading into action.
Thanks for joining us. Until